Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Bradley. I'd like to welcome you to the COVID-19 Small Business Regulatory Relief Committee. And in order to kick it off, I'd like to ask Representative Long to call us in on prayer.
Yes, sir. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day and for this beautiful state that we live in, and that we can live in the free country, and that we live in the greatest country that there's ever been. Lord, we pray so much for our constituents this time that are facing so many challenges, for our small businesses throughout the state who are being stretched to the max on everything that they can do. Lord, I pray that you would be with all of them. Lord, you would be with members of this committee as we hear from the businesses and as we deliberate on what we can do to help those small businesses and our constituents throughout the state. For in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Representative Long. And I would like to take 1 second and ask the members of the committee to introduce themselves, and I'll kick it off. Again, I'm Jeff Bradley. I represent Hilton Head Island and Defusky Island. That's District 123.
And I'm Chip Huggins, and I represent District 85 in Chapin and Irmo in Lexington County.
Hello, I'm Seth Rose, and I represent House District 72, which is downtown Columbia and parts of St. Andrews.
And I'm Stephen Long, and I represent District 37 in Spartanburg County.
And is Leola with us today?
Not on yet.
She's not here yet.
Okay, maybe she'll join us in a little bit. All right, guys, thank you all for being here. We have a good group with us today. We have the business folks that we have asked to come on and give us some idea on where they perceive regulations are getting in the way of them recovering from this COVID insanity that we're going through. And we have Cassidy Evans with Farm Bureau, Ben Homeyer with the National Federation of Independent Businesses, Rick Todd with the Independent Truckers Association, Ted Pitts with the South Carolina Chamber, John Wall with the Manufacturers Association. And I had asked Cassidy if she would lead us off this afternoon, because she had sent me an email the other day, and the philosophy with which she approached the discussion was particularly appealing to me. I think you all understand how I feel about regulations. And I thought Cassidy's approach was spot on for us. And I thought it merited her going first today in the business community. And Cassidy, if you would share with us what you shared in your email to me the other day, I would greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Representative, for inviting me. Can everyone hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much, Farm Bureau, in this discussion. As you know, we are one of the regulated entities, and so we look forward to having a voice in this conversation. We also want to be very clear in stating that the things that we're bringing up is more of a framework kind of areas of concern that we have, rather than with the actual state agencies. We've had wonderful interactions with our state agencies that we work with with the ongoing COVID-19 situation, and we appreciate them being so open and willing to work with us during this time and really doing as much as they can by their own for regulatory relief for our community. So thank you to them very much. Cannot commend enough for what they've done for us. I'll be very brief. I know you have lots of other people to hear from, so I just wanted to bring up 3 points that we've brought that we want to bring to your attention as some issues that have come up because of COVID-19 and also kind of been exacerbated by COVID-19 to the regulatory framework in this state. One of the first things that we want to bring up is this idea that currently, whenever regulation is promulgated, the state agency by its statute. And while that is the requirement now, we think that this might need to be even heightened and more robust, that really it should be tied to a very specific statute. So you really have that check and balance of knowing where that authority came from, the General Assembly, for that regulatory change. We foresee that as COVID-19 continues on, there might be some needed regulatory changes. And we think that this is one of the ways that we can make sure that everything is in the most precise way that it can be in the ongoing situation. The next thing that we think should be a consideration of this committee is the idea that regulation should have a timestamp on them in a way, really kind of had to define how long they think a regulation should need to be in effect. Of course, at some point with regulatory changes, it is a broad sweeping change, but of COVID-19 and the need to be fluid and be able to make changes in an ongoing situation. We want to make sure that the regulated community has some certainty for how long these regulations might be in place so that they can make their own business plans and make sure that everything is as narrowly tailored as possible during the ongoing situation. The third point we want to bring up are the fees that regulatory agencies at times place on small business. As you all know, the economic forecast during this time is not very favorable, and with that, we can foresee possibility of regulatory agencies may having to turn to fees to help prop up their programs. And one of the things that we think that is important is when this is a program that benefits the entire state, that it is not just placed on the regulated community to take care of the funding for that program. So with those 3 points, I can, if you haven't received a copy of our comments, I can be sure to send those to you all to make sure you get them. But just wanted to lay that out there. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm available now or later through this call.
Great. Thank you, Cassidy. Does anybody have any questions of Cassidy? Okay, great. Again, thank you, Cassidy. I greatly appreciate you being here and sharing those views with us. I'd like to start off with Ben Homeyer with the National Federation of Independent Businesses, if we could. Ben, are you still with us?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Could
sir,
you
Chairman.
tell us a little bit about some of the things that you have identified that are front and foremost to the independent businesses in South Carolina?
Sure, absolutely. Again, for those watching, my name is Ben Homeyer. I am the state director for NFIB. And so we are the
Ben,
largest.
tell them what the NFIB is.
Yeah, we're the largest small business group in the state. We have approximately 4,000 unique members. And for those that are looking for some info on small business, 96% of all employers in the state are considered small. I mean, you're talking 400,000 individual businesses that employ roughly 750,000 people in the state. So most of the folks that have a job in South Carolina work for a small business. And I represent a number of those folks. And at the moment, those folks are hurting a great deal. Either they were forced to close, they were forced to make a number of changes where they can stay open, but they have a whole bunch of issues with staying open. And so, I mean, what you're talking about today is extremely crucial. And Mr. Bradley, you and I have talked about this for years, the need for reg reform for small business. There are thousands and thousands of regs that are on the books in South Carolina. In fact, there are more regs than there are laws on the books. And if you're a small business owner, like my folks are, you're operating the front of the store, you're operating the back of the store, you're maybe waiting on a customer at 1 minute and you're working on taxes the next. You're not a large scale business that has a whole HR department, that has a legal department, that is able to navigate through these thousands and thousands of regs that are out there. And so it's vitally important that the government, in a lot of ways, gets out of the way for folks, but in others, doesn't put a whole lot of restrictive burdens on these businesses, especially in a time like now, when businesses are just greatly struggling to stay alive. Real quick, I want to hit on a couple things that Cassidy did say, and that you and I have spoke with before. Her item number 2, with the timestamp that is on regs going forward. You and I in the past have talked about sunsetting of regs and those that are out there. It is one of those things that we've always felt that a reg at some point, NFIB I should say, is that a reg at some point should have to come back before the General Assembly and be explained. I understand sometimes that can be difficult, but it is one of those things that is definitely a burden on business. Not knowing when it's ever going to go away, even though it's scheduled to go away at certain points. So having that discussion. But the fees on that could potentially come out of this. one of the items I had sent to both Megan and to members of the committee a whole sheet that NFIB has put together. And, you know, one of the things we talked about was pausing new regulations going forward. And a lot of that has to do with fees that are out there. And I don't mean all regs, but I'm talking about anything that is not COVID related right now. NFIB would like to see paused, because if it is not essential in relation to COVID right now, it is an undue burden on business, and not just small business, on large business as well. And being able to take that pause, give a breath to find out how it's truly needed, what it truly is going to do, could help make the difference between whether a business goes out of business or is able to come back and thrive to the points that we were before that. You know, looking on the sheet that I had sent out, you know, there's everything from items that will need legislative change, such as liability and tort, you know, things that have been sent to the General Assembly and to the governor's office, to looking at, you know, licensing, being able to, and y'all have done a good job in this, and the governor as well, in pushing out some licensing, extending things like CDLs when they were going to expire, that are reg based, that are not legislative based, but also going through regulatory review, you know, what's out there to see how it does affect the business with COVID relations, things like workforce development, you know, CMEs or CEs, I should say, continuing education, that are all reg based. Maybe they're not needed at the moment. Maybe they need to be changed in some sort of way. Maybe they need to be geared more towards workplace safety and not just general education pieces. So, you know, it's 2 pages of information that NFIB was able to help put together. You know, there are some things I know that Rick's going to talk about when we get there. A lot of my folks, you know, run small trucking companies, basically. So they, you know, as part of their business, they're moving their own goods. You know, there are regs that are out there related to that fall under both the DMV and DOT that I would defer to Rick as more of an expert, but affect my folks. You know, my guys are trying to do all they can to comply with the law, comply with the regs, to stay open, to be able to serve the customers in a safe and effective manner. And anything that we can do here to lessen that burden, I think, is something that we truly need to look at and show that we are in this together. I mean, with the manufacturers, with the trucking, with the farmers. I mean, so many of Cassidy's members cross over, are my members. John has members that are my members. I know Rick does as well. So, you know, it's one of those that the business community is looking to be united on this. And small business, though, which makes up so much of South Carolina and has been that huge economic engine that was pushing us forward for all those years when things were great, needs a little help right now to make sure that we can continue to help keep South Carolina growing and moving forward.
So Ben, just so the public knows, Megan has a copy of that, and we're going to be posting those if she hasn't already posted them, so that everybody can take a look at them. And we still would encourage everybody to give us public input, and we have a mechanism for how that's done. Could you, Ben, go over before I open it up to questions for the members, I wanted to ask you, would you go over that 96% number again that you talked about?
Yes, sir. So in the state, the last numbers that we have seen, 96.6% of all businesses in the state are considered small. And that works out to roughly, it was 723,000 employees.
Out of,
I don't know the total number of employees in the state, but I mean, we have 5 million people in the state. And of those that are employable, though, 723,000 work in small business. And so that's how you get in your 96th percentile of folks that are small business employees. You have roughly 400,000 of those businesses do not have any employees. So you have some folks that are truly your mom and pop, you know, your folks that are doing everything. Is the old saying, your chief cook and bottle washer.
Right.
But then you have others that have 25, 50 employees. But in a lot of occasions, my members, specifically the 4,000 people that I represent, are 10 members or less, 10 employees or less. So they are truly, truly small business. Folks that needed help, at times, but really want to be back at work. I mean, they want to do whatever they can to get back to work. And they don't want handouts from the government. They want to be able to serve their customers. They want to be there every day, looking the person in the face to say, that's why people want to shop small, is they love that personal touch.
Okay.
To get out there and help with those people.
Let me ask you another question.
Sure.
You talked about fees being an issue. Cassidy talked about fees. Are we talking about an occasional $100 fee, or are these multi-$1,000 fees that are omnipresent in their everyday life?
Well, I think it's really all over. It depends on what type of business you're looking at. I mean, if you're looking at a restaurant, you are looking at potentially thousands upon thousands of dollars of fees. When you're looking right here in the city of Columbia, where I'm currently located, I mean, we know that there are ordinances out there where, you have to pay thousands upon thousands of dollars to get a grease trap done, to be done properly. But if you're looking at some other fees, they may be $100. And we're not saying that all are burdensome. We are worried about those, as Cassidy made mention of, if there's potential shortfalls. As we know, for those of y'all that didn't know me in my previous life, I was a house staffer and helped with the budget, worked at Ways and Means. And so I'm very familiar with how the budget ebbs and flows. And so at the moment, things are trending downward.
Is that an understatement?
I'm still being optimistic that I'm hopeful that we'll get some recovery. But there are times when fees are used to help make up some shortfalls. And these can be in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on your type of company. If you're
is that we are vigilant about that and try and preclude that sort of thing from happening where they're making up their budgets relative to the fees. Okay.
Yes, sir. And it is our hope that, and we understand that in some cases they are needed. But if y'all can look at all of those and to make sure that it is truly a beneficial add and not just a cost add to the business is something that I think is imperative for small business and for all business out there.
Megan, is there a way to centrally look at these fees, or are we going to have to dig deeply to find where they all come from? Or do you have any knowledge of that? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Can you hear me? I've unmuted myself.
Yes, yes.
Not that I know of. It would take us going to, because say, for example, a restaurant, the grease trap might be held by the contractor. There's so many different players in here.
Right.
So I would have to talk to the different agencies and dig it out.
Okay.
But yeah, sir, I mean, things like, and again, I know Rick's going to probably touch a little bit more on this, but things like the DMV and the fees that come out of there for, whether it's a motor coach that's struggling to stay alive, or a trucking company that's, having issues trying to stay operational because of some stuff that's hidden out there. Whatever you can do to help us, we greatly appreciate all that you already are doing.
Okay. Are there any other members of the committee that would like to ask Mr. Homeyer a question? Okay, seeing or hearing none, we'll move on. Ben,
Thanks,
thank you for being here. You're welcome to stay with us, or you're welcome to, well, why don't you hang with us in case
I'm going to go on.
something-
I'm going to go on mute, but I'll be here, sir.
Okay, since I happen to be looking at my friend Rick Todd, would it be okay if we ran with you, Rick? If you could give us some idea from the trucker's perspective, the regulation issues that are in front of you that your members are telling you about?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for taking your time to do this, and the members of the committee participating too. I don't want to be a broken record. I've submitted a lot of information to you before to the Hickson chaired subcommittee, and to you, Megan, I sent you an updated presentation here just a little while ago. And we gave you probably a couple of weeks ago a good bit of information on the impact that this situation is having across the industry in all sectors. And it hits everybody differently because we're not the Independent Truckers Association, with the South Carolina Trucking Association.
Okay.
That's the name. And then what we are effectively is an alliance of businesses that use trucks. Similar to what Ben and NFIB suggested, about 90% of the businesses engaged in trucking have 6 or fewer trucks. So 90% of the nation's fleet you see out there are operated by Main Street type businesses. And it's important to understand the industry is really divided into 2 sectors. Private fleets, which are small businesses mostly, that have their own vehicles, commercial motor vehicles, to do their own thing. And then you have for-hire trucking companies of all shapes and sizes. So it's a very, very diverse industry, and it crosses all economic sectors. The thing they have in common, that the quote-unquote trucking industry has in common, is that commercial motor vehicle, which is a property carrying or a service providing vehicle, and generally a CDL driver, a commercial driver's license holder. And so that brings in a whole set of regulations, state, but mostly federal. The federal regulations are so comprehensive that most states don't go anywhere beyond that, because everything that's been contemplated and that's reasonable is already incorporated in the federal regs. South Carolina adopts the federal regs by statute, automatic adoption. So when they're changed, they are automatically effective. So that reduces the need for us to constantly go back and revisit it. They are subject to political whims. One administration may look at regulation of the industry differently than another. The current federal administration is very pro-business, very pro-trucking. They want to keep the supply chain going. And that is evident in the president's emergency declaration. First time ever US DOT declared a national emergency. That gave the president the ability to waive a lot of size, weight, and safety regulations and credential regulations for interstate vehicles and drivers. And then that empowered the states, the governors, to do what they've been doing. And so DOT cooperated on an inter and an intrastate basis by waiving what they could in terms of size, weight, and some permitting allowances. The Department of Public Safety has transport police. They regulate size, weight enforcement and safety enforcement on all commercial vehicles, intra or interstate. They are working with DOT, and the federal government have cooperated with implementing and enforcing the suspensions and the waivers. Other agencies are SLED, which is very important because they've helped coordinate with transport police to make sure that we didn't have local law enforcement problems with curfews and commercial operations. Everybody wanted to keep commerce flowing. And then DMV waived what they could by interstate rules because they're the base jurisdiction for South Carolina-based interstate truckers, if that makes sense. So they have waived the registration, license renewals, and other fee renewals for a period of time. So Team South Carolina really came through. If there is any, I wouldn't say criticism, but if there is any improvement that can be made permanently, but also in view of what has been going on with this pandemic and its effect on our operations, we would say that most of the improvements rest with modifying some of the minor tweaks to the statutes related to DMV, and then some revisions or reversion of previous policies to existing DMV practices. You will remember in the, and Representative Huggins has heard me discuss this in Ways and Means. With the gas tax bill, we'll call it gas tax bill, in 2017, there was a provision that brings in new property tax money from interstate truckers, out-of-state truckers. used to be only South Carolina-based truckers paid that property tax. Well, in the process of that, we moved everything to the DMV, and the counties were supposed to be relieved of any renewal or registration obligations, as was the Department of Revenue. Well, there's been a difference in interpretation, and DMV has continued to keep the counties involved in this process. And by doing that, it's really complicated annual renewals for intrastate based trucks. Interstate truckers that are based here go through motor carrier services, which is a specialized part of DMV. But for intrastate trucks, the fleets that never leave the state, they operate across multiple counties probably and cities, but they have to get their renewal for their tag and pay their property tax, or now road use fee, and maybe some little small, Mr. Chairman, add-on fees by the county to the county. And so they get one big old convoluted, non-line itemed, non-itemized bill, and they don't have the partial pay capabilities or the ability to pay installments like the interstate trucks do through motor carrier services. So we would propose that the House give serious consideration to Senate Bill 1117, which was pending consideration in the Senate when the legislature recessed. That would clean up the code and move everything as intended to DMV, which would allow for one point of contact instead of having to deal with the counties and the DMV. And then look at whatever revised budget compromise the legislature comes up with, lean towards funding DMV's desperate need to update Phoenix, their database, and the trucking database, Celtic. So Celtic and Phoenix can communicate, and we become efficient. We become, that would be the final leg in the one-stop shop that we have worked for decades to accommodate. So DMV and the counties are going to be overwhelmed with these several months worth of suspensions in payments and registrations when they're lifted. If what we intended in 2017 was in place today, we would be only dealing intra or inter with one agency, and that would be the DMV. Most of these transactions would be able to be done online, which would be immune to closures and service disruptions. And we believe that commerce would not be slowed by what we've seen. So that's the big ask. And that's with respect to vehicle-related services. On the matter of driver services, our DMV is good, and they have fairly well utilized what we call third-party testing. So when you get a commercial truck driving school, whether it be operated by a technical college or private school, there are certain allowances where the driver can be tested and licensed by a third party. There are some allowances that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration will allow the DMV to take advantage of that are endorsed by the DMV's national organization, the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, that the DMV is yet to accept and incorporate. We believe they should do that with Godspeed, move towards online training and retraining, certification, recertification, and testing so that we won't have a backlog like we do now at the DMV and at the CDL driving schools. I don't want to belabor the point, but more details about those 4 or 5 things that could be done are outlined in my submission. And, you know, like was mentioned briefly, and I think will probably be reiterated by others, we really need to make sure that our government operates and our government agencies operate with full transparency. When changes to policies and procedures and then their paperwork is contemplated initially within the agency, all the stakeholders, or some of the stakeholders, at least from the get-go, ought to be brought in and consulted. We've found that happen not often enough. And so that would stop some of the conflicts we've got and some of the struggles we have with making sure that paperwork is not overburdened, the overburdening industry, and is simplified. The issues that Mr. Homeyer mentioned, and I think others will, about liability, tort liability, is huge. Trucking probably could be labeled an employer of one of the largest unsupervised workforces there is. The truck driver leaves, the employer can do everything they can to make sure they've got the equipment they need to remain safe and to be safe when they get to their destination and return. But the driver, is on his own. He can choose how he wants to behave or conduct himself. And we do worry a little bit about, or a lot, frankly, about employers' exposure to workers' comp claims and to tort liability. We need safe harbor protections for good actors.
There's a tremendous amount of behavior on the part of your industry to avoid that liability, isn't there? I mean, and that's the sort of thing we're trying to get to, I believe.
I don't know if I'm going to say yes, but if you mean we face a tremendous amount of liability, much of which is beyond our control, actions by others around our vehicles, and the actions of a driver that we're not able to directly control, does pose a huge risk to business, and which is why we're seeing what's happening with the insurance markets.
Well, that then becomes an impediment to doing business. Okay, are you finished, Rick? Or I'm
yes,
sorry.
sir. No, that was my last point. Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Todd? Okay. Rick, thank you for the things you've submitted, and we appreciate your time, and thank you for being here. You're welcome to stay or go, whatever your pleasure is.
Thank you.
That being said, I got to go back here and see. John Wall with the Manufacturers Association, do you mind, are you still on the line with us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. If you wouldn't mind, give us your view from the South Carolina Manufacturers Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee for all your hard work on behalf of businesses and especially small businesses. And thank you for having me here today. So I represent the South Carolina Manufacturers Alliance and represent the manufacturers in the state. And I know this is about small business and regulations, so I'll quickly just touch upon those regulatory type issues. And the manufacturers, most people don't know this, but at least 40 of our businesses are small businesses, 50 employees or less, and at least 60 or 100 employees or less. So small business issues are paramount to us as well. And we have several committees. We have the environmental committee, HR, plant safety, plant managers, tax and economic development, and several different committees that have been working with a lot of the respective agencies. And first and foremost, I want to thank the Department of Employment Workforce for their hard work and what they've been doing during these trying times to keep businesses moving, the ones that have decided to continue operating, and those that are coming back to restarting their operations. Obviously, Department of DHEC, Department of Health and Environmental Control, they've also been instrumental in providing some necessary permit extensions, working with our environmental committee, and some of those they are just time extensions in order for businesses to comply with environmental regulations, to keep their employers safe, to keep the environment safe, and to comply with federal and state regulatory requirements. So it's been instrumental, and we might need to look at, from a business standpoint, further extending some of those general extensions. And they've also set up a framework to allow businesses that are having other type of issues that aren't a blanket extension for some of the permit reporting and testing requirements, to also receive some one-off tailored relief. So that's DHEC has been instrumental. DO has been great. DOR, OSHA, LOR, their OSHA department, obviously keeping workers safe and also letting businesses know exactly how they need to operate. So I think the stakeholder engagement with those agencies and with the legislature is paramount. Obviously, flexibility is our biggest concern because we don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know, when we are going to be able to provide all the necessary information, but we stand ready to provide that information to the regulators from the business standpoint. And transparency has already been hit upon, and that's important to us as well. And this mainly goes towards the fees, which Cassidy mentioned, and Ben, and now Rick. Fees, when an agency needs money to operate, from a manufacturer standpoint, we believe like the general fund and should take care of most of that. And if there's additional money that's needed from a fee standpoint from the regulated community, we feel like it needs to be a very transparent process. We need to identify what money is actually needed, and then also what that money is going to be used for. And then we want to have a say, like Rick mentioned, and I think Ben as well, in that process early on, which we have been doing. But we need to continue that conversation and continue that communication. And then as far as another issue that we see is permit time lengths. We want to make sure that the speediness, the speed of permitting is an issue that is not an issue for our businesses. From my prior experience as an economic development attorney, when you look at an existing business and their cost of compliance, or for new businesses when they're looking to relocate or expand their existing footprint in the state, one of the top critical economic development factors that's looked at is the speed of permitting. And permitting is especially hard for small businesses because it's an upfront compliance cost. So that's something that's very important to the manufacturers and to the business community.
Hey, John, can I interrupt you right there and ask
Yeah.
a question? Because if I don't, I'm liable to forget it. And that is the permitting process is it a function of the numbers of people at the agencies that are in charge of issuing the permit, or is it a timeline that causes it to take a long time? I mean, is there a shortage of manpower and woman power at the agencies that are creating this problem?
I don't think I think it's more of a manpower and the agency being able to have enough money to retain good quality permit reviewers and the people that process those permits. So that's I think it's, and I don't want to speak on behalf of any of the agencies, but I think the timeliness of permits would be resolved by, yes, having more permit reviewers, and then having the agencies have the ability to pay the high quality folks to have them be retained to continue in their current role, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Definitely. And so in short, those are really my comments. I just want to say, we really thank you all for your hard work. We really want to thank the agencies for working with the business community. And then, flexibility, transparency. And then again, when fees are going to be initiated on the business community, that there's a transparent process with key stakeholder engagement. We would appreciate that.
Excellent. Well, I think I'm going to reiterate what Mr. Todd said, and that Team South Carolina has done a good job of being flexible in trying to address the needs of what have popped up in this COVID pandemic. But there is still work that we need to do going forward. Okay, anybody have any questions for Mr. Wall? Okay, seeing and hearing none, then we'll move on. I think the last but not least, I believe, is Mr. Pitts with the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce. Ted, are you still with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Barely, Ted.
And I've tried to
That's good right there.
yeah. So if I move closer, I'm sorry that I'm having a little technical difficulty here. You know, I'm going to touch a little bit on the items that the colleagues before me touched on. All partners with the need for transparency, that's key. You know, as we move through this process, no regulation should be implemented during this kind of unprecedented time. So those things are very important. And I'm going to touch a little bit on the chamber survey we did, which over half the respondents were small businesses. And then I'm going to give you 3 things that the South Carolina House of Representatives can do that will help small businesses. You know, first, if you look at the feedback we got from our survey, really the number one issue for all businesses is demand and demand for their goods or services. And small business has been impacted as hard or harder than the general business population. So they need attention. So when you look at the 3 things you and the South Carolina House can do for small business, the first is you may or may not know that SC do, when we're under a state of emergency with furloughs or layoffs, those layoffs don't hit an employer's account during a state of emergency,
right,
but they do after that's been lifted. So we would like to see that provision be extended until the end of 2020, where furloughs and layoffs don't hit an individual employer. And, you know, when you look at a restaurant or a small business, a
right,
mom and pop retailer, you know, that's important to make sure it doesn't hit their account. So we'd ask that you do that. In addition to that, we'd also ask that, you know, some of the billions of dollars the federal government sent the state to deal with COVID-19, that you use some of those resources to supplement the trust fund. So Director Elsie will give you some data points that he's given us that are very concerning about how quickly the trust fund that's been rebuilt will be depleted. So we would encourage those things. The second thing you can do, the Senate has passed the bill, and this bill sits in the South Carolina House of Representatives. Senate Bill 486 is the e-notarization bill. So a lot of small businesses, financial planners, real estate companies, because of social distancing and the requirements being put in place to keep people apart, e-notarization would make it easier for small businesses to conduct financial transaction and other business transactions. So Senate Bill 486, we would encourage the House to take that up and pass that. And then last but not least, small businesses need some liability protection. And that's been touched on by Ben and Rick and others, and John. It needs to be dealt with. When you look at liability protections, businesses are not going to be able to open up if they're uncertain that if they open up to generate revenue, if they're putting in themselves at risk. So ultimately, in order to open up South Carolina's economy, which small business is the backbone, you're going to have to pass liability reform. And when you look at it, it's going to be narrow. It's going to be focused on this period of time. We're not asking for something forever. But when you look at where we are today, and if you're a business owner, you have concerns about customers and employees. I can tell you, nobody cares more about the safety of their customers, employees, than a business owner, a small business owner. But they need some sort of assurance, some safe harbor that says if they do things, follow guidelines that are set forth by the CDC and others, they follow those guidelines, that they're protected as long as they're doing everything they can to keep their customers, employees safe. This is not trying to protect bad actors, but it is something that small business is looking for. So those 3 items, if you're really looking for how you help small business during this time, pass those 3 items, and you've done that. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you. I have had a lot of exposure to the due issue that you were talking about with it hitting the employer's account. Could you go into a little bit more, because of the restaurants I'm dealing with down here, so I'm familiar with it. Would you share with others the technicality that represents? Because I think that's a nuance that is not well appreciated. And I don't know, maybe all our members know, but if you could cover that, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, so every year, the Department of Employment and Workforce gives you your new tax rate. So there's multiple, I think there's 8 tax rates in the state that businesses get that they pay their SUTA taxes on, under their unemployment taxes. So if you're an employer, if you had a lot of separations during the previous year, that means your former employees are drawing on the system, then you have a higher tax rate that you have to pay into the system. So taxes increase with the number related to the number of layoffs or furloughs that you might have. So, what the current provision says that during a state of emergency, hurricane, the pandemic, if you lay employees off, then those don't draw on your account and don't go into the calculation of your tax rate next year. So when you look at the coming year, taxes are going to get moved up on a lot of small businesses who during this time had to close their doors because of no fault of their own, because government basically shut them down. And in essence, their taxes are going to be higher. Their pseudo taxes are going to be higher. So what we're asking is let's take this provision that excludes it during the state of emergency and let's extend it to the end of 2020. And it would allow for small businesses to get back on their feet. And hopefully by January, they're up in some sense of the new normalcy.
Okay. And I have one additional question, Ted, relative to, you referred to it as narrow and focused relative to the removal of liability on businesses at this point. I can see the liability attorneys fussing about that. How do you see that playing out? What?
So we've been working with a group of partners, John and the Manufacturers Alliance, the Hospital Association, Medical Association, and others, Rick Todd, NFIB, Ben, Farm Bureau, all the business associations. This is one of their top issues, if not the top issue. I think the reality is, obviously, the trial bar, a lot of businesses have been shuttered, if you will, during the pandemic. The trial bar probably has too. So they're going to get creative and find ways to try to look at this pandemic as a way to make money. And so I guess we would tell you that, the trial bar is going to have a position. We feel like that proposal that we're working on with leadership in the House will be narrow and targeted. So, we only want to cover this period of time, and we only want to protect those businesses that are doing the right thing by their customers, employees. But you're going to have opposition. We know that trial attorneys in the legislature will be called to action by their colleagues. And I think our hope is that we can put that aside and we can say we're in the middle of a crisis, and targeted and focused legislation that would provide some liability protection, some assurances to small businesses that are going to open up, try to serve their customers in a safe manner, needs to be something the General Assembly deals with. And it doesn't need to wait till the fall. This needs to be something that the General Assembly comes back this summer, takes up and deals with. And we're confident in the House. We've heard from leadership loud and clear. It's a priority of theirs. And we have work to do in the Senate. We know that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do any other members have questions of Ted?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Huggins.
Ms. Pitts, just curious, have you spoken to Jeff Johnson at all about the e-notarization?
I haven't personally, but I believe folks on the chamber team have as well. And we're happy to follow up with him if we need to.
Yeah, he's very aware that we would like to see that passed. And of course, it passed the Senate, so we can certainly do it if we can get it over here passed. But I think he's got a few issues. If y'all could try to work with him to get those resolved, I think it would be very helpful. I've talked to him about it the last day we were here, a long time, and I think it would be great to work with him.
Yeah, we want to work with him and try to find some common ground so we can pass the bill. So thanks.
Also, Mr. Huggins, you can have your folks get in touch with me too, Ted. I kind of have some backstory of that particular bill and some of the concerns that other members have that I'd be happy to share with you to try and help move that forward.
Yeah, we need to get it through. So happy to work with folks. Thank you.
That'll be good. You're welcome. Thank you for being here with us today. Does anybody else have any comments or anything they'd like to bring up for the good of the committee? Okay. At this point, guys, it looks like we're still interested in public input, and we have a mechanism for that. And I think that's pretty well known at this point, how that's done. Megan has a space for that on her website. would very much like to encourage all members to continue to press their relationships to solicit individual public input on where regulations are getting in the way. I think we've gotten a pretty good handle on it. I am interested in getting a rough draft done by next Monday or I actually would like to do another meeting next Tuesday because Monday is Memorial Day. If we could have a meeting at 2:00 on Tuesday, that would be wonderful if nobody objected to that. And we're trying to get a draft done so that we can distribute it to everyone. And then we'll work on that and see what input the individual members have in next Tuesday's meeting, and then see if we can land this guy and get to work on trying to make some of these changes that we've identified. Does that work for everyone?
Yes, sir. I think so. And Mr. Chairman, I think last week I made mention about possibly getting feedback from the other state agencies on what actions they've already taken. Have we heard back from any other state agencies on what they're doing? I know that we had gotten feedback from LLR, from DHEC, and maybe one or two others. I didn't know if we had heard from any other agencies on what they're already doing. Because I think part of what we might conclude in our report is, these items that the agencies have already taken action on, extending that out or making some of that permanent, or basically taking what they've already started with as a framework moving forward for what we want to do.
Oh, that's excellent. Megan, can you address that in any way, shape, or form for Representative Long?
Yeah, I have not had a ton of luck getting a lot of input from the agencies. I've emailed them, some of them a number of times, and just haven't heard a lot back. So I will keep trucking at that and get what I can as we start to write the report.
Well, you've also said, Megan, in the past that LLR and DHEC were the two major players in what's going on out there around us right now, and that's why you brought them in to begin with.
Correct.
But yeah, if you don't mind, keep plugging away at that and see what you can do, because I think Stephen brings up a good point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I appreciate your work, and I have no doubt that it can be hard to get a hold of some of the agencies sometimes.
Yeah, it's everybody's working remotely too, so it can be a little tough. We'll get there.
Chairman Brown.
Okay, does anybody else have anything for the good of the committee that they'd like to bring at this point? Comments, wishes, desires? Okay, that being said, I appreciate everyone being here today and taking their time to join us, and especially you folks from the business community and members of the committee. So all that being said, yes, ma'am.
I think Mr. Rose is trying to get.
Oh, okay.
Are you muted, Mr. Rose? You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Hey, Mr. Chairman, I was wanting to know, is it possible for us to hear from the nonprofit business community? I've heard from some constituents that have expressed some concern in that regard. I know a nonprofit business organization, Together SC, would like to perhaps give some input. Is that a possibility, or should I reach out and get that information to Megan?
I would be in favor of that, and and we could do that on the front end of next week's meeting, because what we're talking about is a draft, and whatever they brought to the table could be added. I would also like to hear from, if Megan, if it's at all possible, the like the Black Chamber of Commerce or the African American Chamber of Commerce, whatever group they represent, and the minority interests. I would like to hear their voice and see what sort of problems they might have as well. Is that something that you have access to and could help us with?
I'll certainly work on that. Sure.
Okay. Anybody else?
Thank you.
All right, guys, that being done, we'll call this meeting concluded. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.